Somehow I've stumbled into the ancient ruins section of YouTube. There's giant Himalayan towers that are star-shaped, and there's no stories left about them in the villages. I'm thinking to myself, like, there's a few stories. There's they were built by proud people to show off how great they were. They were built by a proud man to show off how proud he was. Those are the stories. Now they're surmising other things, and since, over time, some of them have become religious sites, like a place to sky bury the cremains of your beloved ones, which is a very Himalayan thing to do. There's no evidence that they were used for storing food. They look like a watchtower, frankly. They look exactly like a watchtower. Stuff kids in there, just send the local boys to do, you've got 4 hours, don't come down from the tower. Or 2 hours, or I don't know. I don't know kids that well, but however long a young boy can sit up there and watch the road, sometimes many hours. It's actually a pleasure. So you send your kids up there to watch the road. And if they see whatever it is you're watching for, they can easily climb down and run through the town letting everybody know. Much more quickly than whatever it is he's watching for will get to town. They probably have a commanding view of some pass, some mountain pass, or a mountainside that has the road on it that's distant enough that they've got a couple of valleys to cross, or a valley, or some distance to go, and a kid can readily run through, and the town can assemble to deal with the visitors. So I'm thinking to myself, because they kept saying that it was the Song dynasty, the Mongol dynasty, and there was a period in China's history when China was controlled like it is now. The current Chinese government wants to control the furthest extent of the Mongol Empire that ever existed. And that includes the Himalayas. So, it seems to me the emperor sent a decree out to each town and village in these mountainous areas that they should build these towers, and local crafts builders would have built them, allowing for the slight variations in design and construction methods. They would have been given some basic instructions, something simple to transmit to mostly illiterate people through an empire run on horseback. So they would have been given horseback, and there was probably some form of pigeon transport for long distance, but mostly it would have been runners and couriers. So these people were instructed and doubtless paid to build these towers, because paying people or giving them a break on the taxes or giving them some kind of a perk was definitely part of showing off how big you were. Just like a wealthy man likes to tip the servants. It shows everybody how rich he is, especially if he's nouveau rich. It's a really big, popular one, is to pay people for their trouble. You're not mean, you're wealthy, you can pay. So this wealth that was injected into every town where these towers were built, by my theory, this wealth would have created proud families. It would have made somebody rich in town. Rich enough to act like a twit. Possibly even conferred him some authority. To act like he was better than everybody. If there's one thing that people of the mountains don't appreciate, it's egotism. I think you can fairly say that. Mountain people don't appreciate egotism. It's probably those darn mountains. A man can feel pretty big standing on top of a mountain. And so maybe it's a habit of mountain people to slap you down. At any rate, The habit of many societies to slap down an ego, frankly. So then we're moved on to Peru and the Incans. And I'm looking at this architecture, and I'm seeing that it doesn't look Egyptian. It looks like Egyptian's cousin. And I'm wondering, like I saw a neat documentary on where the fellow proposed that the Egyptians built simple water canals and floated. That water hydraulics was not so hard to do, and they had a good command of it, that they created irrigation water type canals, temporary canals, that became roads after. And that these canals floated the blocks from the quarry to the building site, and indeed they had sufficient command of hydraulics to build a series of locks that went up the pyramid, allowing them to actually elevate the blocks into position as they built, and that they could have had a water trough all the way around as they built. That was a really interesting presentation. And he was explaining how the nubs on the blocks facilitated tying them to air bladders. And that was when I was looking at the Incan ones, and they had the same little nubs on the blocks, and I was like, whatever they're using, those nubs are there to hold the blocks. And I started just noticing the general construction and the geometry behind it, and the artistic style as well, and the color favorites, and started thinking, man, it looks a lot like Egyptian. Not like Egyptian, but like Egyptian. The way that, I can't explain it. Like an exported technology with an overlay of local art forms. Yeah, that's what I mean to say. I said that well. An export of technology and a local overlay of design overlay. Excuse me. I'm doing the dishes. I do these talks when I'm doing the dishes. So there's two ways I thought of. Well, I could think of three ways that those two cultures could share the same technology. I thought, well, a boat conveying members of one society to the other society is one way technology gets shared. Say an entire, even just one engineer from Egypt could conceivably have taught the Incas how to build pyramids. So I looked up the timeline. It seems to be there's about 500 years between it. And that's really rough. I mean, when did the Incans first start building their pyramids? I didn't really pin that down. But it seems to me 500 years, it has to be within 100. Because you've got to have, at the very least, a young man who does a great sea voyage and arrives there and teaches. And the Incans all gather together and make it a cabinet. So that seemed unlikely. And I thought, well, perhaps documents released by an Egyptian into the ocean, jars of documents, or lost on a boat, the currents taking them, papyrus scrolls, full of technology, to the Peruvian coastline. That could take 500 years. That was kind of cool. But then I thought, well, then the Peruvians would know how to write, the Incans would know how to write Egyptian. And I haven't taken a look at the two writing styles to see if the Incans adopted the Egyptian style of writing. Perhaps they did or didn't invent paper to figure out how to write on paper. I don't know. I mean, they wouldn't have had papyrus. They wouldn't have had that plant. They would have had to use something else. That's an in-depth level that I'd like to get into, but I can't because I'm washing dishes. And I'm not sure that I will when I sit down, because I might take up, I might forget by then. So that's another method, is the scrolls could have arrived on shore, and the Incans deciphered them. And that would be an interesting one to look up. And then the third method I can think of is spontaneous ID. I had a really good term for it, and now I can't remember it. That memory. It's a weird memory because it has short-term flaws, but long-term information retrieval that is astonishing. So, sometimes you can have an idea, and that idea pops up somewhere else at the same time. And it can be demonstrated that the two people had not communicated in any way, shape, or form, and that there was no way for the one person to get the idea from the other person, and yet both people have it. There were experiments done on monkeys, where monkeys on islands were taught tricks. Well, not tricks. Survival. They were taught something. I think it was how to eat a certain kind of food, or they were taught something. And they learned it. They learned a cool new technique. And then that technique would pop up on other islands in the surrounding area, even though there had been no travel between the islands of monkeys. So how did the other monkeys figure it out? Nobody knows. Of course, all of us witches are saying, well, it proves psychic stuff is real. And that comes to the question of perhaps the Incans came up with the same methods of stone moving as the Egyptians, all on their own, all due to, like how you'll have an animal, two animals evolving from completely different animals into the same looking animal, like a red panda and a raccoon, when in fact they're quite different roots, but they have the same niche in the environment, and they have the same needs. So if the Incans also played around a lot with hydraulics in order to bring water to the mountain cities, in order to irrigate mountainsides, because they were mountain people. And that's interesting because the Egyptians were not mountain people, they were river delta people. And yet the two cultures both clearly worked with water and hydraulics and learned these things. And they both came up with the same idea, different times, separated from each other. I think that's pretty cool. I've had ideas that I've shared with somebody who is in no wise capable of transmitting those ideas to others. Well, now, I shouldn't say capable. Likely to is what I really mean. They're not that interested. I bore people with my ideas. And I've shared these ideas, and then I know that there they stay. But it is my belief that an idea once shared between any two minds is more likely to pop up in a third mind. If you have a great idea, you can tell anyone. Telling your dog helps you learn to put the words together, but no, it has to be a human mind that can understand your language and visualize, picture in their mind for a moment the idea that you're drawing. And I think that when we do that, it starts popping up elsewhere in our species. Completely different people, somewhere on the other side of the world, suddenly have that idea spontaneously. They're just looking at a problem and puzzling over it and go, hey, I could do this. And that person's going to have the ability to actually bring it to life. And maybe there's, 150,000 of us all have that idea that night. Only one of us can do anything with it. But that one makes it happen. So I really believe in sharing my ideas. It also helps me feel like the world's got a future. Because there are ideas. I often hear people say there is no answer, or there's no solution, or it can't be done. And my father usually said, I don't know if I can't do it until I've tried. And if you try hard enough, long enough, you'll probably manage to do it. I have a similar saying. I've already forgotten. That's short-term memory. I don't believe that there are situations that have no solution. I believe there are situations where we don't know the solution, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We just haven't thought of it yet. And so we keep trying, as my father would say, until we think of it. And if we take the attitude that anything can be solved if we're patient and determined and open to new ideas. My father was. There were things he was very stone hard on. And there was a point after an accident, he lost a lot of blood to one side of his brain, and it, I thought, caused his intellect to calcify. He got stuck in one spot. It might also be a thing that happens to old men, because I've seen it happen to others where their intellect calcifies, but then I've seen others that it doesn't. So a lot of researchers say it's a factor of how much time you spent exploring and experiencing and puzzling and trying new things, playing musical instruments, traveling, taking up new skills and new hobbies and new interests. You keep your brain working. Seems to be a big difference between whether or not your brain calcifies. But my father's situation seemed to happen practically overnight. He went from a towering intellect to a towering ego with no intellect to back it up. He knew everything he had ever known but learned nothing new. And so he couldn't correct the knowledge that he had if it was false. Because some of the knowledge that we trust now need to be corrected later. There are things that we understand about the world that we have understood incorrectly for a very long time. And that information could be corrected at any moment. And there's absolutely no way of predicting which. Some things we kind of already have our doubts about. But there are things we're certain about. It was a time that I was certain that the Bible was written by a supreme being. I have a completely different theory now. I'll have to get into that in another video.